The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when arrogance met its match. Karen Henderson, her face twisted with rage and flushed red, stood pointing her finger directly at Judge Judy like a weapon aimed at the most feared television judge in America. The words that burst from her mouth would be replayed 35 million times in the next 48 hours, becoming the most viral courtroom moment of the decade. "I pay your salary." The declaration hung in the air like a grenade that had just been thrown but hadn't yet exploded. What happened in the 7 seconds of absolute silence that followed would destroy Karen Henderson's life, expose her as a serial scammer who had stolen from hard-working contractors for years, and deliver one of the most satisfying moments of justice in television history. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. Karen didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in the next 3 minutes was so devastating, so brutally precise, so perfectly executed that it became a masterclass in how authority dismantles entitlement. Because Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the very first question, and Karen Henderson had walked right into it with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences in her life. Before we show you the complete annihilation of one of the most entitled Karens ever caught on camera, you need to understand exactly who this woman was and why this moment had been building for years. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that bullies eventually get what they deserve. Karen Henderson was 48 years old, a substitute teacher from suburban Connecticut who had spent the last decade perfecting the art of weaponizing her status as a taxpayer against anyone she considered beneath her. She wasn't just a difficult customer or a chronic complainer. Karen had turned entitlement into a lifestyle, a crusade that defined her identity. She called herself a taxpayer advocate and citizen watchdog, titles that sounded noble until you saw what they really meant in practice. Karen spent her days filming government employees doing their jobs. Searching for any small mistake or perceived inefficiency she could turn into outrage content for her growing social media following. Her routine was almost ritualistic. She would enter a post office, DMV, or public library with her phone already recording, manufacture a problem, escalate it into a confrontation, and later edit the footage into a gotcha video portraying herself as a brave taxpayer standing up to lazy bureaucrats. Her favorite line, one she used in at least 15 documented incidents over 3 years, was always the same: "I pay your salary." Those 4 words were her weapon, her shield, her justification for treating public employees like personal servants who existed only to obey her demands. Her digital footprint revealed a pattern of addiction to power and public humiliation. She was the admin of a Facebook group with over 3,000 members, an echo chamber where she rallied angry residents against government waste and bureaucratic incompetence. Each post drew hundreds of likes and comments, reinforcing her belief that she was doing something important, holding the system accountable, fighting for the little guy. But anyone who actually knew Karen knew the truth. She wasn't fighting for anyone but herself. Her crusade against government workers was just the public mask for a much darker pattern of behavior. The real Karen Henderson, the one Judge Judy's research team had uncovered, was far more sinister. She had a long history of targeting hard-working people who depended on prompt payment to support their families. Over the past 4 years, Karen had hired contractor after contractor to work on her home, and each time she executed the same scam. She would hire someone for a legitimate job, agree to the price, sign the contract, and express satisfaction with the work. Then, when it came time to pay, she would suddenly claim the job was defective. The accusations always came without evidence. She never allowed contractors a chance to fix anything. Instead, she would refuse payment, launch a smear campaign on social media, post fake 1-star reviews everywhere, and share their contact info with her followers, unleashing harassment that destroyed their reputations. David Chin represented everything Karen had learned to exploit. A small business owner with limited resources, an immigrant who had built his livelihood on integrity and word-of-mouth referrals. The kind of honest worker who couldn't afford to fight back. And when Karen Henderson targeted David, she had no idea she was walking straight into a trap, one that Judge Judy had been waiting years to spring. Karen thought she had found another easy victim, someone who would walk away from the final payment, rather than face the expensive nightmare of legal action. But she had made one critical mistake. David Chen was not the kind of man who backed down from bullies. Even if fighting back meant risking his family's financial security, he wasn't going to let anyone destroy what he had spent 15 years building. 17 years earlier, David had arrived in America with $300 in his pocket, a toolbox passed down from his father, and an unshakable belief that hard work would be rewarded. He started small, taking the jobs that established contractors didn't want, the repairs and renovations that barely covered expenses. But he treated every project, no matter how minor, with precision, pride, and care. Within 5 years, David had built a reputation that any contractor would envy. Perfect 5-star ratings across every platform, a waiting list of clients who requested him by name, and the kind of word-of-mouth trust that money couldn't buy. He had achieved the American dream through integrity, craftsmanship, and a relentless work ethic. When Karen Henderson contacted him about renovating her bathroom, everything seemed perfectly normal. She was polite, agreeable, and accepted his $3,200 quote without any negotiation. David had no reason to suspect that behind her friendly smile was a seasoned scammer who had perfected her methods over years of exploitation. The project went flawlessly. David showed up on time every day, kept the space spotless, communicated clearly, and completed everything exactly as outlined in the contract. The finished bathroom was beautiful, better than Karen had even imagined. During the final walkthrough, she smiled, took photos, and thanked him warmly for his excellent work. David left her home that day, believing he'd just completed another successful job. He had already planned where that $3,200 would go. $1,500 toward his daughter's college fund, $1,000 to catch up on business expenses, and the rest for an anniversary dinner with his wife that he'd been promising for months. But that payment never came. 3 days later, David sent a polite reminder invoice, assuming Karen had simply forgotten. No reply. After a week, he called and left a friendly voicemail asking when it would be convenient to pick up the check. The call he received in return came from a completely different person. Karen's tone was sharp, cold, and full of accusations. She claimed the work was substandard, that there was damage to her home, that David had violated their agreement. When David offered to come back and address any issues immediately, she refused, calling him incompetent and saying he wasn't welcome in her home again. Then, the real nightmare began. Within 24 hours, one-star reviews appeared everywhere David's business had an online presence. Long, emotional lies claiming he had ruined her bathroom, damaged her walls, and refused to make things right. She posted warnings in local community groups, calling him a scammer. Karen even shared his business phone number in her Facebook group, urging her followers to hold him accountable. The harassment started instantly. David's phone rang non-stop with angry calls from strangers. His inbox filled with hate messages. Potential clients canceled upcoming projects after seeing the flood of false reviews. Within 2 weeks, his business revenue had dropped by 60%. His wife, Jennifer, begged him to walk away, to write off the $3,200 and try to rebuild. But David knew better. He had seen what happened to other contractors who gave up. Their reputations never recovered. So David made the hardest decision of his career. He hired a lawyer he couldn't afford, gathered every invoice, message, and photo, and prepared to fight. What Karen Henderson didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that Judge Judy Schindlin had already seen straight through her scheme before she even stepped into the courtroom. Way to escape, and when that moment came, it would be broadcast to millions. By the time the bailiff called the case of Chen versus Henderson, Karen was already in full performance mode. She walked in with exaggerated confidence, her posture straight, her smile smug, her designer blazer meticulously pressed. David, by contrast, looked exactly like the kind of man Judge Judy respected. Humble, organized, and visibly exhausted from months of stress. Karen started strong, or so she thought. Her voice was syrupy sweet, her words carefully chosen to make herself seem like the reasonable party. She claimed David's work had been sloppy, that tiles were uneven, and that he had damaged her plumbing. She sighed dramatically when describing the emotional distress she had suffered because of his unprofessional behavior. Judge Judy listened without expression, occasionally jotting down notes but mostly observing. When Karen finished, Judy turned to David. "Mr. Chen," she said calmly, "let's hear your side." David's voice trembled slightly at first, but as he spoke, his quiet confidence grew. He described every step of the project, produced signed contracts, text messages confirming completion, and, most importantly, photos of the finished bathroom, time-stamped and pristine. Karen interrupted repeatedly, protesting, rolling her eyes and muttering under her breath. Each time, Judge Judy's expression hardened just a little more. When David finished, Judge Judy leaned back in her chair and said evenly, "Ms. Henderson, I've been doing this for a long time, and in that time, I've learned one thing. People who are telling the truth don't need to talk over everyone else." Karen forced a laugh. "I'm just passionate, Your Honor. I've been through so many of these situations with bad contractors." "That's interesting," Judge Judy interrupted sharply. "So many? How many exactly?" Karen froze. "Well, maybe 2? 3? Judy glanced down at her file, then looked back up with a glint in her eye. "Try 6. The courtroom went silent. 6 contractors, Ms. Henderson, 6 claims of substandard work, 6 refusals to pay, 6 online harassment campaigns, and I have documentation for each one." Karen's jaw dropped. That's not true." "They were all—" "Save it," Judy snapped. "You're done talking." She motioned to the bailiff, who handed her a printed screenshot. "Do you recognize this?" Karen squinted, color draining from her face. It was a Facebook post, her own words, unmistakably hers. Judge Judy read it aloud. "Here's how to avoid paying final bills to contractors. Ring any bells?" Karen stammered. It was a joke." "Really?" Judy said icily. "Because the people you scammed didn't find it very funny. Mr. Martinez lost his business. Ms. Patterson filed for bankruptcy. And you—" She leaned forward, voice low and cutting. "You sat behind a keyboard laughing about it." Karen's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "Yes, you did," Judy replied. "You meant to get free work. You meant to ruin reputations. And you meant to keep doing it until someone stopped you. Well, consider yourself stopped." Karen began to cry, mumbling excuses about being misunderstood. But Judge Judy was unmoved. "My judgment is for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,200 plus court costs. In addition, this case will be referred to the district attorney for review of potential fraud and defamation." Then she added coldly, "And Ms. Henderson, if you ever pull this stunt again, you'll be learning the difference between small claims court and criminal court the hard way." Karen's face crumpled as the audience gasped. David Chen, barely holding back tears of relief, thanked the judge quietly. As the cameras faded out, Judge Judy looked directly into the lens and said, There's no such thing as a free renovation. You use people, you lose. Simple as that. What came next would make Karen Henderson the most infamous defendant the show had ever seen. And prove, once again, that Judge Judy's courtroom was where entitlement went to die. Thick and absolute. Even the audience, usually eager for drama, sat frozen as Judge Judy's expression hardened into that unmistakable mask of controlled fury that longtime viewers recognized immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, calm, and infinitely more dangerous than any shout could have been. "Let me make something very clear to you, Ms. Henderson," she said. "You don't pay my salary, you don't own this courtroom, and you certainly don't get to come in here and bully your way out of accountability." Karen's defiance wavered. Her mouth opened as if to respond, but Judy didn't give her the chance. "I've listened to you lie," the judge continued. "I've watched you perform, and I've read enough to know exactly who and what you are. You've been running this same scam for years, pretending to be the victim while destroying the livelihoods of honest, hard-working people who trusted you." Karen's face drained of color. "You think I don't do my homework?" Judy asked sharply. She lifted a folder from her desk and flipped it open. "This is you, Ms. Henderson. 6 prior disputes with contractors in 4 years, all following the same pattern: non-payment, online defamation, and intimidation. And now, we have your own words from your Facebook group. Make them work for it. Most will just give up." A murmur rippled through the audience. Karen shook her head furiously. "That was taken out of context. You can't—" "Enough!" Judge Judy snapped. The single word cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. "You have spent years taking advantage of people who don't have the time, money, or resources to fight back. But today, you picked the wrong man. Mr. Chen came prepared, and I've seen the truth, every single word of it." Karen tried to speak again, but Judy's voice only grew colder. "My judgment is for the plaintiff, in the amount of $3,200, plus court costs and damages for defamation. And one more thing, Ms. Henderson, this file," she tapped the folder on her desk, "is being forwarded to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal fraud." Karen froze, her bravado collapsing completely. "You're done," Judge Judy said simply. "You're not clever. You're not the victim. You're a con artist. And in this courtroom, con artists lose." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo forever. David Chen exhaled shakily, tears welling in his eyes as he thanked the judge. The audience erupted into applause, something rarely permitted, but impossible to suppress in that moment. Karen slumped back into her chair, pale and speechless, realizing for the first time that her long-running scam had finally met its end. And as the credits rolled, viewers across the country knew they had just witnessed one of the most unforgettable takedowns in Judge Judy history. The moment a quiet craftsman triumphed over a professional scammer, and justice, for once, was absolute. "That's not true. They're all lying. They were trying to overcharge me," she shouted, her voice trembling somewhere between rage and panic. Judge Judy's response was ice cold. "No, Miss Henderson. The only person lying here is you." She lifted another document from the folder and held it up for the cameras. "And do you know what this is? This is a screenshot from your Facebook group. You wrote, and I quote, 'Here's how to avoid paying final bills to contractors. Find small imperfections, refuse access for repairs, leave bad reviews until they back off.' Does that sound familiar?" Karen's jaw dropped. "That post was taken out of context." "Context?" Judge Judy repeated sharply. "The context is fraud. The context is harassment. The context is you, Miss Henderson, taking advantage of decent people who trusted you to keep your word." The courtroom was silent, except for the faint rustle of paper, as Judge Judy turned the next page. Her tone softened. but the precision of her words made it even more devastating. You didn't just refuse to pay for work. You damaged reputations, destroyed livelihoods, and left honest people humiliated because you thought your so-called status as a taxpayer made you untouchable. But let me remind you, being a taxpayer doesn't make you powerful. It makes you responsible. Karen's hands trembled visibly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again when Judge Judy leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "I've been on the bench for over 25 years," the judge continued. "I've seen every kind of scammer imaginable. But what sets you apart is the utter lack of remorse. Even now, with the evidence right in front of you, you're still pretending to be the victim." She turned to David Chen. "Mr. Chen, your testimony was credible, your documentation complete, and your integrity unquestionable. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,200 plus additional damages for defamation totaling $5,000. Then, looking back to Karen, Judge Judy delivered the final blow. "And as for you, Miss Henderson, this case may be over in my courtroom, but I'll be forwarding every one of these documents to the proper authorities. Fraud is a crime, and I think they'll be very interested in your taxpayer advocacy activities." Karen's composure shattered completely. "You can't do that. This is just TV." Judge Judy's voice dropped to a whisper, deadly calm. "This may be television, but the consequences are real. And for the first time in your life, so are yours." The gavel came down with a resounding crack that echoed through the stunned silence. David Chen exhaled, his shoulders shaking with relief. The audience erupted into applause, despite the bailiff's attempts to quiet them. Karen Henderson stood frozen, eyes glassy and unfocused, realizing the empire of manipulation she had built over years had just collapsed in front of millions of viewers. And as the camera zoomed in on Judge Judy's face, calm, unyielding, and utterly victorious, the world witnessed the perfect, devastating moment when arrogance finally met accountability. Hallway, a haunting mix of rage, regret, and disbelief. The cameras lingered for a moment longer, capturing the full collapse of a woman who had built her identity on deceit, and now found herself crushed beneath the weight of her own arrogance. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Judge Judy setting her pen down and straightening the papers before her. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, almost reflective. "Actions have consequences, Miss Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You spent years manipulating, lying, and exploiting the good faith of others. Today, that ends. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but it always comes." Karen didn't respond. Her sobs had quieted into broken hiccups as the bailiff led her toward the exit. The confident, self-proclaimed consumer advocate who had strutted into the courtroom hours earlier was gone, replaced by a shattered figure realizing that the game was finally over. Judge Judy turned her attention back to David Chen, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Chen," she said, "you did everything right. You worked hard, you honored your contract, and you stood up for yourself even when it seemed impossible. I hope this restores some of your faith in fairness and in yourself." David managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. With that, Judge Judy gave a single nod and stood, signaling the end of the case. The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. Not for the drama, but for the rare satisfaction of watching justice delivered so decisively. As the cameras zoomed out, the final image broadcast across millions of screens was Judge Judy, walking calmly from the bench, her expression unwavering. Behind her, Karen Henderson was led away in tears, the sound of her own downfall echoing in the background. It was more than just another viral courtroom moment. It was a reckoning. Reminder that arrogance always meets its match. and that in Judge Judy's courtroom, the truth always wins. Hallway, as she stumbled out, the microphones capturing every sound. Audio that would soon become part of a viral phenomenon already beginning to ignite online. Within 24 hours, the video of Karen's outburst and her spectacular downfall had spread across every social media platform imaginable. The moment she screamed, "I pay your salary," at Judge Judy was clipped, shared, remixed, and turned into memes that would cement her place in internet infamy. The hashtag #TIPayYourSalary began trending on X, formerly Twitter. Citridihanda tweets, used ironically by millions to mock entitled behavior wherever it appeared. The view count skyrocketed. 5 million in the first 6 hours, 15 million by the end of the first day, and over 35 million within a week. Karen Henderson had finally achieved the fame she'd always chased through her social media crusades, but not in the way she'd imagined. The fallout in her real life was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, her position as a substitute teacher was terminated, the school board citing a pattern of harassment toward colleagues, complaints that had long gone unaddressed until now. Her Facebook group was permanently shut down after mass reporting, with thousands flagging it for promoting fraudulent activity. Meanwhile, the 3 contractors she had previously scammed, James Martinez, Robert Williams, and Linda Patterson, filed civil suits demanding payment and damages. They had all suffered financially and emotionally at Karen's hands, but now, with public support and video evidence, they finally had the power to fight back. The Connecticut Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Karen's pattern of fraud, while local news outlets aired stories about the substitute teacher turned serial scammer who had been exposed by Judge Judy. On the other side, David Chen's life transformed overnight. His business received an outpouring of support. Consultation requests flooded in, and a GoFundMe started by strangers raised over $50,000 to help him recover from the losses Karen had caused. Local media celebrated him as the contractor who stood up to a bully and won. And within 48 hours, Karen's husband quietly paid the full $5,700. Judgment, apparently deciding that paying was better than enduring more public humiliation. Smash that like button if you think Karen got exactly what she deserved after years of scamming hardworking people. Comment, "Justice served," if you believe Judge Judy delivered the perfect response to someone who thought yelling, "I pay your salary," could intimidate a judge with 25 years of experience. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unbelievable courtroom moments where entitlement meets reality and loses. Because, as Karen Henderson learned in front of millions, the internet never forgets. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, arrogance doesn't protect you. It guarantees your destruction.
It started with a smirk that could curdle blood. The kind of smirk that says rules are for other people. The cameras had barely started rolling when Richard Halden III adjusted his gold cufflinks, leaned back in the witness chair and whispered to his attorney, "Let's make this quick." He didn't believe for a second that Judge Judy Sheindlin, America's most feared dispenser of televised justice, could do anything that would dent his world of Bentleys, Martinis, and billion-dollar clients. To him, this was entertainment. Another arena to parade his charm. Another clerk to talk down to. He'd been here before, just not in front of millions of eyes. Richard's reputation in Beverly Hills was legendary and poisonous in equal measure. He was the man who bought silence. When employees complained, he bought their NDAs. When partners questioned invoices, he sent luxury gifts and lawyers in equal measure. For years, he perfected the art of skating just inside the law, but arrogance is a patient predator. It waits for the loudest man in the room to stop checking his mirrors. And when the summons from Judge Judy landed on his glass-top desk, Richard laughed so hard his assistant thought he was choking. "A TV judge," he said. "Perfect. I'll turn it into free PR." He strutted into the courtroom like it was a red carpet gala. The cameras loved him. He loved them more. His linen suit glowed under the studio lights, and his smile, so rehearsed, so mechanical, reflected off every lens. Across the aisle sat Emily Cross, a middle-class art gallery owner who once trusted Richard to deliver a restored vintage car for her husband's 50th birthday. The car never arrived. The money vanished into the bureaucratic fog that follows men like Halden. Her lawsuit was modest, reimbursement and damages. What she didn't know was that her small claim would expose something far larger. Judge Judy entered, and the room straightened like iron filings to a magnet. Even Richard, for a brief flicker, shifted in his chair, but the moment she began the formalities, he was back to checking his watch, tapping his pen, smirking at the audience as if they were extras in his show. When asked to confirm his identity, he leaned toward the microphone and said, "Richard Holden III, entrepreneur, philanthropist. You've probably read about me." It wasn't a greeting. It was a taunt. Judy's eyebrow rose a quarter inch, the quiet signal every veteran viewer recognized. The storm had noticed him. She asked for the complaint summary. Emily's voice trembled but held. She explained how Richard had promised delivery, taken payment, and disappeared behind layers of assistance. As she spoke, Richard chuckled audibly. That sound, rich, amused, dismissive, slid across the courtroom like oil on water. Judy froze mid-sentence. "Mr. Halden, is something funny about her loss?" He shrugged. "It's just business, Your Honor. People exaggerate." The courtroom air turned heavy. Viewers would later say they felt it through their screens, the shift from irritation to inevitability. Judy Shinlin had found her target. For minutes, she listened, hands folded, the picture of restraint. Richard, mistaking silence for weakness, filled it with noise justifications, half-truths, humble brags. He explained how he'd invested the client's money, how delays work, standard procedure, how successful men like him deal with impatient people all the time. Each word built the case he didn't know he was losing. When Judy finally spoke, her voice was low, almost conversational. "Mr. Halden, do you believe wealth excuses deceit?" He laughed again. "I believe wealth redefines deceit. Let's be honest, everyone in this room works for someone like me." The gasp that followed wasn't theatrical. It was instinctive. For a heartbeat, even Judy said nothing. Then she leaned forward. "You think I work for you?" He smiled. "Well, technically taxpayers." "Wrong answer," she cut in, her tone sharper than glass. The bailiff's eyes flicked to her. He'd seen that tone precede countless reality TV knockouts, but this wasn't performance. It was precision. "In this courtroom," she continued, "respect isn't purchased by the pound." The audience murmured, but Richard kept grinning. "You can't punish me for being successful." He didn't see it, but the tiniest spark lit behind Judy's eyes. The spark of a teacher who's about to grade an overconfident student outside the studio. The clip of that moment would later trend worldwide. But inside, tension coiled tighter. Judy gestured for the file. The clerk handed her a folder stamped Exhibits A through E. Richard didn't notice. He was too busy whispering to his lawyer, rehearsing jokes for the post-hearing interviews. He thought this was about a car. It WSN single quote stay. Inside that folder lay documentation of previous judgments. Unpaid liens and correspondence from the state tax board, documents Judy had quietly requested after the case assignment crossed her desk. She'd seen too many versions of this man to come unprepared. "Mr. Holden," she said evenly, "you mentioned philanthropy. Tell me, how philanthropic were you when you failed to satisfy a judgment in the past for deceptive business practices?" His grin faltered, the first visible crack. He opened his mouth, but words stuck. "That matter was sealed," he muttered. "Not from me," Judy replied. The gavel didn't fall, yet everyone heard it. She turned to Emily. "Ma'am, we'll get to your restitution, but there appears to be more here than a missing automobile." The camera caught Richard's throat tightening, his fingers twitching toward his tie. The courtroom was silent now. Even the bailiff's breathing seemed to slow. Judy flipped another page. You told this court you can't be punished. Would you like to revise that statement before I finish reading this list? Richard's jaw locked. With all due respect, Your Honor, you're making a spectacle. Judy's tone cooled another degree. Mr. Holden, I don't make spectacles, I end them. The gallery erupted in a low rumble. Somewhere in the back, Emily's husband clasped her hand, a small tremor of vindication passing between them. Judy adjusted her glasses and said quietly, We'll take a short recess. The gavel tapped once. Richard exhaled, mistaking the pause for mercy. It wasn't mercy. It was prelude. Outside, producers whispered, sensing gold. Inside, the man who once believed money could erase anything now faced a silence heavier than any fine. He didn't know that the next minutes would dismantle everything he built on charm and checks. He didn't know that Judy's team had cross-referenced every public record with his statements, or that she'd already found the contradiction she would use to bury his defense. He thought the cameras existed to immortalize him. They were about to expose him. The gavel had rested, but justice had just drawn its breath. When the cameras flickered back on after the recess, the air inside the studio courtroom felt different. Thicker somehow, as if everyone could sense that something irreversible was about to happen. The murmur of the audience had died into a watchful quiet. Even the bailiff stood a little straighter, eyes fixed on Judge Judy's bench. Court resumed. Mr. Holden, she said, before recess, you claimed that your business dealings were, quote, standard procedure. Let's test that. She picked up the first sheet from the folder. This is a copy of your contract with Miss Cross. It lists delivery within the month. Do you dispute signing this? Richard adjusted his tie, performing confidence he didn't feel. That's correct, Your Honor. But the contract didn't account for supply chain delays. Global issue. You know how it is. Global issue, Judy repeated, letting the words hang like bait on a hook. And yet the vehicle you promised was located in state, purchased and resold within a week by your own dealership. Interesting interpretation of global delay, the audience murmured. Emily's eyes widened. She hadn't known that detail. Richard's tongue darted nervously across his lips. That sale was unrelated, he muttered. Unrelated? Judy's tone sharpened. Same VIN number, same color, same restoration certificate. Unless your company practices cloning, Mr. Holden, it's the same car. And you sold it for triple the price to another buyer while keeping this woman's money. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Richard inhaled, visibly rattled. Business decisions, Your Honor? Nothing personal. Judy leaned forward, elbows on the bench. That phrase, nothing personal, is always used by people who make their living being personal. You took her savings? You lied about delays. And when confronted, you called it business. You understand, Mr. Holden, that's not entrepreneurship. That's deceit. For once, he didn't have a clever retort. His eyes flitted toward the cameras as though seeking sympathy from an invisible audience. But this wasn't the boardroom or the golf club. This was a place where ego was currency only if the judge accepted it. And she wasn't buying. Judy turned to Emily. Ma'am, did you ever receive communication regarding this second sale? Emily shook her head. No, Your Honor. The last message I got was that the car was in transit. Transit, Judy repeated, then looked back at Richard. Transit to a wealthier buyer, I assume? The laughter from the spectators was quick and sharp, like the pop of a whip. Richard tried to hide his flinch. I don't appreciate being mocked, Your Honor. Then you'll hate what comes next, Judy said. She flipped to another page. Bank statements. According to these, your company accepted the funds, transferred them to a Shell LLC, and closed the account within hours. Care to explain? Richard leaned back, eyes darting. That's standard asset management. Asset management. Judy's voice was rising now. Controlled but cutting. It's theft wearing a tie. You've built your empire on the assumption that paperwork and polish disguise exploitation. Well, consider that illusion officially revoked. Every word landed like a gavel strike. The audience was spellbound. They weren't just watching a case. They were watching a performance of power's shift hands. Richard's smirk had evaporated, replaced by a cold sheen of sweat. The millionaire who once claimed no one could punish him now resembled a schoolboy cornered by a head mistress with perfect memory. Let me tell you something, Mr. Holden, Judy continued, voice calm again, but with that lethal precision she reserved for lessons that lasted. This courtroom doesn't bend to income brackets. You are not an exception. You are an example, he bristled. Your Honor, I don't deserve to be publicly humiliated. Oh, you're not being humiliated, she replied smoothly. You're being educated. The humiliation is optional. That line would later flood social media, printed over slow motion clips of Richard's defeated expression. But at that moment, it felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He crossed his arms, looking anywhere but at her. Judy flipped through the papers again, pausing only long enough to glance at him over the rim of her glasses. Now, she said, let's address your statement before recess that I and everyone else here work for you. Do you wish to stand by that? He hesitated. Pride waged war with survival. I was speaking figuratively, he said finally. A joke. I didn't laugh, Judy said simply. Neither did Justice. Gasps, muffled laughter. Judy pressed on. The difference between power and privilege, Mr. Holden, is accountability. Power serves others. Privilege serves itself. You've spent your life confusing the two. The gavel hadn't yet come down, but the verdict had already begun to crystallize. The courtroom buzzed with the electric hush that precedes collapse. The realization that the arrogant man in the linen suit wasn't untouchable after all. Your Honor, I've contributed millions to charities, Richard said suddenly, grasping for moral cover. I employ hundreds of people. And how many have you fired for disagreeing with you? She countered instantly. Charity given from guilt is just laundering at a nicer font. That line drew applause. Rare and risky during taping, but Judy let it roll. She'd earned it. Richard's eyes flashed, the mask cracking at last. You can't talk to me like this, he said. Correction, Judy replied. I just did. Then she leaned back, folding her hands. Mr. Holden, we're not finished. I've read your prior cases. You have a pattern of settlements designed to silence plaintiffs. This time, you won't have that luxury. Today, transparency is mandatory. He opened his mouth, then shut it. The first glint of fear appeared. Not for the money, but for exposure. The one punishment he'd never prepared for. Wealth had insulated him from consequence his entire life. But this was different. Judy Shinland was not another lawyer to outspend. She was the mirror he couldn't bribe. Here's what's going to happen, she said. I'm going to read and to record the details of your prior judgments. You may object, but understand every word you speak will remind the world of who you are. So choose carefully. The bailiff handed her another stack of papers. Cameras zoomed in. Richard swallowed hard, and before we begin, Judy added, her tone dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the room. Remember this? When you said I couldn't punish you, you didn't challenge my power. You challenged my patience. That was your real mistake. He blinked, caught between indignation and disbelief. The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Every second, another tick toward combustion. For the first time since entering, Richard Holden, 3, looked genuinely small. His fingers fidgeted with his cufflinks, the gold flashing under the lights like fool's treasure, and as Judy prepared to read the first record aloud, the audience leaned in, breath held. They all knew it now. The fall had begun, and there was no buying his way back up. Judge Judy sat perfectly still for a long moment, her fingertips resting on the edge of the file. The cameras caught her profile, the calm of a surgeon before an incision. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady, deliberate, and cold enough to make the air vibrate. Mr. Holden, since you've expressed such confidence in your immunity to punishment, we'll start with a little refresher on accountability. She lifted the first page, holding it high enough for him to see his own letterhead printed across the top. Case number to 441, years ago. You settled out of court with a contractor for unpaid invoices totaling $0 settlement amount, no record of payment. Does that sound accurate? Richard cleared his throat. That matter was resolved privately. Privately, Judy repeated. Meaning quietly, meaning out of sight, meaning unfinished. She placed the page on the bench with a deliberate tap. Let's move on. Case number 2027. An employee lawsuit alleging wrongful termination and harassment settled again under confidentiality. But court records are public. I can read the complaint if you like. I don't think that's necessary, he said quickly. Of course you don't, Judy replied. Because every settlement you buy is another brick in the wall between you and responsibility. She didn't look up from the file. She didn't need to. The room was silent except for the shuffle of paper and the slow creak of Richard's chair as he shifted. Case number. Your dealership was cited for falsifying odometer readings. Case number. Misrepresentation of imported parts. Case number. Failure to disclose bankruptcy during a property sale. Each citation fell like hammer blows. Richard's jaw clenched. Your Honor, these are irrelevant to this case. They're relevant, she said, because they reveal a pattern. And patterns tell us whether a person's wrongdoing is accidental or habitual. I'm looking at habit, Mr. Halden. Audience barely breathed. Judy flipped one more page, slower this time. And then there's this, a letter from the State Revenue Office. You currently awaiting back taxes? Shall I read that aloud? Richard's voice dropped. That's under appeal. Then consider this part of your education in humility, Judy said. When you lie to this court about your character, you invite me to teach you the truth. She set the stack aside and finally looked up. Tell me, Mr. Holden, how much did you expect to lose today? Excuse me. You came in here treating this case as a publicity stunt, she said. You thought the cameras would turn you into the charming millionaire defending himself from a greedy complainant. You expected a fine, a little embarrassment, then another press release about resilience. You expected control? Richard's hands gripped the arms of his chair. I expected fairness. You got it, Judy said. Fair fairness is seeing yourself without makeup. The line hit hard. Somewhere in the audience, someone exhaled audibly. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but the sound that came out was small and brittle. I'm not the villain you're painting, Judge. I've made mistakes, but mistakes are for people who learn, she interrupted. You've made a business model. The words sliced the air cleanly. Judy stood then, an uncommon move that sent a ripple through the room. She walked to the edge of the bench and looked directly at him. When you told me I couldn't punish you, what you really said was that no one ever had. Every time you bought silence, every time you settled instead of admitted, you reinforced the illusion that you were untouchable, but illusions only survive in darkness. Today there are lights. Her gaze shifted toward the cameras, then back to him. Do you understand what those lights mean, Mr. Holden? They mean people see Yano. All the money in the world can't buy invisibility here. The effect was visible. His shoulders sagged. His eyes darted downward. For the first time, he looked like a man realizing there was no exit. Judy returned to her chair and resumed her calm tone. Now, before wet-aside restitution, I'll allow you one opportunity to speak directly to the plaintiff. Emily hesitated, unsure. Judy nodded encouragingly. Go ahead, Mr. Holden, he swallowed, voice thin. Miss Cross, I regret the misunderstanding. Regret the misunderstanding. Judy cut in, incredulous. That isn't an apology? It's an evasion. Try again. Richard blinked. The camera zoomed closer. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Inconvenience? Judy echoed. You took her savings? You sold her car to someone else? You humiliated her in front of millions. The word you're searching for is not inconvenience. It's betrayal. Say it. Richard stared at her, lips pressed. Your Honor, say it. The silence was unbearable. Finally, through clenched teeth, he muttered, betrayal. Better, Judy said. Now say the second word, sorry. His voice cracked. Sorry. And just like that, the sound of those two words, so small against his usual bravado, broke something invisible in the room. The audience didn't cheer. They simply watched, spellbound, as if witnessing the unmasking of a myth. Judy leaned back again, satisfied, but unsmiling. Mr. Halden, what you feel right now is what accountability tastes like. It's bitter because it's real. You've spent decades seasoning your conscience with excuses, but truth has no sugar. Emily's eyes glistened. For her, this wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Judy turned to her gently. Miss Cross, you will be repaid in full plus damage sand costs. But that isn't the most important outcome here. What matters is that the man who once believed no one could punish him just punished himself with his own arrogance. Richard's face was pale now. This isn't justice, he murmured. This is humiliation. Judy's tone softened, but only slightly. Justice often feels like humiliation to the guilty. You can't separate the two. One is the medicine, the other is the symptom. The words hung in the air. Somewhere outside the courtroom, Venator producers signaled the editor to mark the moment. They knew they'd found the heart of the episode, but inside no one moved. Judy's gaze stayed fixed on Richard, unflinching until he finally looked away. Now, she said quietly, you're going to hear my ruling. And when you do, remember every word you spoke before this hearing began. Because they're about to echo back louder than you imagined. He nodded stiffly. Jaw tight, a man grasping at composure while his empire of confidence collapsed around him. Judy reached for the verdict form. The pages rustled like distant thunder. You told this court you couldn't be punished, she said, signing her name with a flourish. Consider this an introduction to reality. The gavel struck once, sharp, final, reverberating through the room. But she wasn't done. As the echo faded, Judy looked up again. Mr. Holden remained seated. The financial ruling is only half of your sentence. The rest concerns your conduct. The audience stirred. Richard blinked. My conduct. Yes, she said. The part of punishment money can't buy your way out of. And with that, she began outlining the second phase of the sentence. Something so unexpected that even the seasoned crew paused, unsure if they'd heard correctly. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The only sound came from the quiet shuffle of Judy's papers as she stacked them neatly, her movement slow and deliberate like punctuation between thoughts. Then she lifted her gaze to Richard Holden, who sat motionless, an expensive statue of denial. Mr. Holden, she began, her voice steady, but carrying the gravity of final judgment. Your arrogance doesn't end with money, so neither will your punishment. He blinked. Your Honor, I've already agreed to repay. I'm not finished, she interrupted. You've spent your entire life believing you could outsource morality. Write a check, erase a consequence, hire an apology. That ends today. The room was silent enough to hear the faint buzz off the overhead lights. Judy continued. You will of course repay Miss Cross in full principal damages and fees, but beyond that, I'm ordering hours off community service. Not behind a desk, not in an office. You will report to the Southside Auto Vocational Program, where teenagers from low-income families learn to repair cars. You will assist as a volunteer mechanic under the supervision of their director. Richard's face was drained of color. That's absurd. I have businesses to run. You had ethics to run too, Judy said coldly. You neglected both. A soft ripple of laughter passed through the spectators. Judy leaned forward. You claim to be an entrepreneur. Let's see what you can build without money, only hands, humility, and time. He shook his head. That's beneath me, and that, Judy said, is exactly why you're going to do it. Consider this lesson number 2. Work only becomes beneath you when character does too. The audience held its breath. It wasn't cruelty. It was the symmetry of justice. For once, the punishment wasn't about headlines or dollars. It was about confrontation with truth. Judy signed the order, her pen moving with surgical precision. Your compliance will be verified weekly. Failure to comply will result in contempt proceedings. I trust you understand what that means. Richard sat frozen. Eyes unfocused, his arrogance dissolving into something smaller. Confusion, maybe fear. You can't make me scrub cars for kids, he said softly, the old defiance flickering one last time. Judy folded her hands. Watch me. The gavel hit the block with a single echoing crack. The sound rolled across the courtroom like a closing door. The unmistakable finality of power exercised without spectacle. The millionaire who believed no one could punish him now faced a sentence that money couldn't dilute, spin, or settle, and the silence that followed wasn't just his. It was the silence of realization. The moment when the untouchable finally touches the ground. The clip went viral before the court transcripts were even filed. Within hours, millions had watched the moment Judge Judy said, "Watch me." It was replayed, remixed, and subtitled in half a dozen languages. The internet, that merciless arena of instant judgment, crowned it the greatest courtroom takedown of the decade. But beyond the laughter and headlines, something more lasting began to happen. People didn't just mock Richard Holden. They studied him. He had become a living example of how arrogance looks when it finally meets gravity. In Beverly Hills, reporters camped outside his showroom. His publicist, once so confident, issued a statement calling the decision deeply unfair. But even the media that once flattered him turned. Articles appeared from millionaire to mechanic. The fall of Richard Holden. Customers canceled orders. Investors distanced themselves. His face became a meme. The frozen moment when disbelief shifted to dread. For the first time in his adult life, Richard's name wasn't a brand. It was a warning. A week later, he stood at the gates of the Southside Auto Vocational Program. Gone was the linen suit. In its place, gray overalls, work gloves, oil-stained and 2 sizes too large. The director, a patient man named Thomas Grant, greeted him without ceremony. "You're the guy from TV," he said, handing him a wrench. "We've got transmissions waiting." Richard tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. The shop smelled of motor oil and metal dust, the kind of place where hands mattered more than titles. Around him, students no older than moved between workbenches, focused and disciplined. No one asked for selfies. No one cared about his wealth. In that room, he was simply another man learning the difference between effort and excuse. The first days were agony. The tasks were simple, lifting, cleaning, tightening bolts, but the humility was not. His palms blistered, his back and his pride screamed with every scrape of the wrench. But with each passing hour, the noise inside him began to fade. For the first time, no assistant hovered. No layer translated his failures into strategy. There was only work, honest, repetitive, cleansing. Week became a month. The gossip faded. The news cycle moved on. Yet within the shop, something unexpected bloomed. Richard started listening. He began asking the young mechanics questions, learning how they balanced classes with night shifts, how they saved for tools they couldn't afford. They didn't mock him. They simply worked beside him. And somewhere between the grease and silence, the man who once believed himself untouchable began to understand the simple truth he'd spent decades avoiding. Respect isn't purchased. It's practiced. When his hour ended, Thomas Grant handed him a clipboard for sign-off. "You finished," he said. "You can go back to your world now." Richard looked down at his hands, calloused, lined with oil that soap couldn't quite erase. "Maybe I needed this world more than it needed me," he said quietly. That night, for the first time, he drove himself home. No chauffeur, no assistant, just him, the steering wheel, and the long, silent reflection of streetlights on glass. He thought about Judge Judy, about the way she hadn't raised her voice or gloated. She hadn't humiliated him for entertainment. She had stripped away his armor so he could see what he'd become. Weeks later, during an interview he hadn't planned to give, Richard was asked what the sentence had taught him. He paused, considering I used to think punishment was what happens when you lose, he said. But maybe it's what happens when you finally get a chance to change. The clip went unnoticed at first, buried among courtroom highlights. But those who watched it noticed the difference. Not the fall, but the tone the arrogance was gone. In its place, something quieter, something almost human. Emily Cross received her repayment in full plus damages as Judy had ordered. When asked how she felt, she said, "I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth, and I think we both got it." Judge Judy moved on to her next asterisk case, unshaken as ever, her benches firm and her gavel as final. But in the asterisk endless churn of viral moments and moral sound bites, one quote from that episode endured. It wasn't the insult or the asterisk outrage or even the punishment. It was the single line she had spoken before asterisk lowering the gavel for the last time. You can't buy silence from justice. Asterisk eventually it always raises its voice. For Richard Halden, that voice had come asterisk from a woman half his size, but twice his strength, and from the echo of a sentence that didn't need to shout to be heard around the world.